This is not a test. This is not a test. Please remain calm.
Unburied dead are coming back to life and seeking human victims.
Seeking human victims. Seeking human victims.
Welcome to Seeking Human Victims, the podcast. It is the bonus episode number 3, our first of 2 Christmas specials this season. We are feeling festive in the holly jolly spirit of murder. I am your host, Dan Wilson. We have a skeleton crew here tonight on the Seeking Human Victims podcast. Illness has wiped out half of our crew, but fear not, we still are bringing you a show. Of course, my lovely wife, co-host, co-founder of One Good Scare Productions, co-host of the Spooky Tricks web show, and a whole lot more around here. Annie Wilson, how's it going?
Hello!
And the star voice actor, yet another great commercial parody just released, this time for Smith's Grove Sanitarium. You can catch it on the social media, but he's been the star of pretty much all of those and lots of the burial plot segments as well. Mr. Jason Griswold, how are you?
Not too bad, Dan. Ready to dig in here?
Well, I'm excited for this one. Always enjoyable to sit down to some of the holiday horror. It is a burgeoning genre. Interestingly enough, tonight's film comes from 1974, was one of the first films of this genre, and the genre laid somewhat dormant for several years after, but it seems to have exploded in recent years with so many different Christmas-themed horrors. Krampus, which we'll be discussing here in a couple of weeks. The new All the Creatures Were Stirring from Rebecca McKendry coming out this month. There's Sleigh Bells from director Spooky Dan Walker, and last year, Better Watch Out. That was a fantastic holiday horror movie.
That was one of my favorites of last year. That was a really good movie.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of surprised we didn't bring it up more on the What We Were Thankful For episode a couple of weeks ago, because that really was a standout of last year's films.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess because it was so squarely in last year.
And it was in the running for the second Christmas episode of this year, but it did not make the cut. It was Krampus who won a very tooth and nail fight with Silent Night, Deadly Night just chomping right at its heels, but it was the Christmas demon that ended up winning out, so we'll be looking at that in 2 weeks. But tonight, Black Christmas started more than just the holiday horror subgenre. It actually, in many ways, started the slasher genre. A lot of people credit this film, and there is some controversy, but a lot of people credit this film as being the first slasher film. Of course, you can make an argument that Psycho might have been that. It certainly was the grandfather of slashers or laid that groundwork. Mario Bava's Bay of Blood is certainly in the running for one of the first slasher films. Some people consider Blood Feast from Herschel Gordon Lewis to be one of the original slasher films, as well as Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But a giant percentage of the camp thinks that Black Christmas is the originator.
The Coroner's Report.
All right, so on the Coroner's Report, we're digging into, of course, the history, going beneath the flesh of the film. And one of the things we always really lead with here is a little bit of information about the director of the film. The director, in so many cases, in horror in particular, is responsible for the overall vision of the way these classic films come out. And in this case, no different. Directed and produced by legendary director Bob Clark. Now, at this time, he was not a legendary director. He had done very little. Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things had just come out. Another movie called Death Dream he had made just before that. But when he got to Black Christmas, he was still a relatively unknown guy. He went on to have a huge career. If you don't know him by name, you'll certainly know him by his films. Another not quite as morbid Christmas film, but still one in the pantheon of holiday nostalgia and just something that people go back to every year, A Christmas Story. He was the director of that. He was the director of Porky's and Porky's 2. He directed Steven Spielberg's Amazing Stories television show, as well as the film Loose Cannons with Gene Hackman and Dan Aykroyd, and Baby Geniuses, as well as a ton of other stuff.
Huh. That's absolutely fascinating. What a wide variety of movies.
Definitely part of all our childhoods.
In
And
one
in
way
our
or-
adulthoods.
In one way or another, we have all been touched by Bob Clark.
Yeah, he touched some of us in a funny place, but only figuratively. In this era, I need to clarify that. It's a joke, people. It's a joke.
Directors shouldn't play with dead things.
Definitely. It's so unlike your Hitchcock, your Carpenter, your Romeros, your Hoopers, the auteurs we've come to know and love here on the show. Clark was a little bit different in his background. He's actually a jock. He was born in New Orleans, Louisiana in 1939. He grew up in Birmingham, so he was a Southern man. He later moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Grew up a poor man. His father died during his childhood. His mother was a barmaid. He attended Catawba College and majored in philosophy, where he won a football scholarship to Hillsdale College in Michigan. That's where he played quarterback, and eventually studied theater at the University of Miami, turning down offers to play professional football, though he did briefly play semi-pro for the Fort Lauderdale Black Knights.
What a nerd.
Yeah, that's got to be the first time in history that has ever happened.
Yeah.
And probably the last.
No thank you to professional football. I'm going to do theater.
We're all glad he did, with the great list of credits that we already went over. He made his directorial debut in a 1967 short film version of The Emperor's New Clothes, starring John Carradine. And the aforementioned Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things was his horror debut in 1972. So during this time, he had moved to Canada, which at the time many American directors were doing. It was a big trend. They did it as a tax shelter, and coming from Hollywood, it was a big deal to the Canadians. They were considered big fish in a small pond. So Bob Clark was met with a hero's welcome to Canada.
It's also worth mentioning at this time that Canada, the Canadian government actually provide directors with money to make films. That's where you get a lot of David Cronenberg films.
And it was very smart of Bob Clark to do this, because where he wasn't having a lot of success stateside, he started to find some of that success. A company called August Films collaborated with Vision 4 Productions, and they sold the film to financiers based on Clark's success with previous movies alone. So that helped them get their financing. The original script was penned by Canadian Roy Moore, no relation, and it was originally called Stop Me, and it was based on the famed urban legend of the babysitter and the man upstairs. This has been utilized time and time again in horror, back to just the campfire stories, I believe is where that one originated. But movies like Don't Answer the Phone, When a Stranger Calls, books like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, even more modern films like Scream and All Hallows Eve all owe a bit of a nod to that tale. He combined the traditional urban myth with a series of real-life murders that occurred during the holidays in Montreal shortly around that time. And the first script rewrites were done by Timothy Bond, and he added the university setting, and then the final rewrites were done by Bob Clark himself, who rewrote the dialogue to make it feel more natural. Clark, at that point, really felt like teenagers and college-age kids were only portrayed as naive idiots in films. But, when he met them and mingled with them, he felt like they were some of the smartest people he knew. So he didn't want them to just be soulless fodder for the killer. And he says this now, that the original script was too much of a slasher film, though that is kind of ironic since, for all intents and purposes, this was one of the first movies to earn that distinction. Black Christmas was shot on location in Toronto in the winter of 1973 and 74. And the house that they used was discovered by Bob Clark when they were scouting for locations. Their owners agreed to lease the home for the project, and additional photography was completed on the actual University of Toronto campus. According to John Saxton, Bob Clark had so meticulously drawn out the storyboards that he could get everything he needed just from looking at those. So that's always great when you hear actors had a great time working for the director. They made it easy for them to do the job. And before we wrap up the coroner's report here, we do have to dig into the casting. And of course, the biggest coup in the casting for this was the casting of Olivia Hussey as Jess Bradford, the English actress who was born in Argentina, had just rocketed to international fame in 1968's Romeo and Juliet, and had also awakened the sexuality of many high school freshmen for decades since. Ourselves being a couple of them. She was considered a huge get, as this was her very next movie. So coming right off of Romeo and Juliet, she got the lead in Black Christmas.
I wonder how many boys out there that's like the first boobs they ever saw.
Like a good 80% of the ones I know.
I mean, we were already talking about that, not on the show, but that's what that movie's known for. Probably what she's most known for, unfortunately.
And then we had
Keir Dullea
as Peter Smythe. Clark was impressed with his performance from 2001: A Space Odyssey. I think it's where most people would know him from.
You know him as Dave.
Well, that's a lot easier to say than Keir Dullea.
I'm afraid you were trying to disconnect me. And then Margot Kidder as Barbara Cord, of course, most famously known as the legendary Lois Lane from the Christopher Reeve Superman franchise, and just lost her just this past year. So nice to go back and watch a great performance of her. I actually think Margot Kidder steals this movie, is my opinion. I think she, of all of the actresses, has the best performance in the film.
Yeah, you can definitely see some kind of early incarnation of her Lois Lane characterization, and the kind of heavy drinking, loud mouth.
I'll tell you what right now.
And she did.
Like the first line of the movie is "Close the goddamn door." So that tickles the shit out of me. She was cast because she was a wild and out of control character, and not conventional as a lead. They were impressed with her and Brian De Palma's sisters in her previous performance, and that's what got her cast in that role. Andrea Martin was cast as Phyllis Carlson, interestingly enough, as a replacement for Gilda Radner.
That could have been a completely different role, I think.
I don't know who that is.
Andrea Martin, you know her from SCTV.
No.
More modern, she's on Great
Gilda
News.
Radner.
Gilda Radner was one of the original cast members on Saturday Night Live. And most of those people came from SCTV. Well, excuse me, not SCTV, but Second City. That's the comedy troupe where a lot of those people come out of.
I feel like I probably know who she was if I were to
Oh,
see
you
her.
would, yes. She was one of the most famous people from the old days of SNL. And then John Saxon, cast as Lieutenant Kenneth Fuller. And this is a perfect segue to...
Step right up and enter a world where the mortal man will find facts that defy imagination. What strange truths and morbid curiosities will be revealed inside the auditorium.
That's right, the auditorium. So why am I talking about John Saxon from the casting to the auditorium? Well, there's an interesting reason, because the story behind his casting is quite strange. So originally, he was not the guy that was to get that role. It was originally cast and given to Edmund O'Brien. And upon his arrival to the set, he started fumbling and stumbling over his lines. He couldn't remember anything. Their performances got worse and worse by the day, and he was a hot mess. Well, they had him checked out to find out, is he all right? Like, this guy's really, he's not known for this, and he's really making a real shit show here on the scene. So he had fucking Alzheimer's, and he found out based on that. They got him tested. So, of course, when they found out that he had Alzheimer's, no go, had to recast the role. John Saxon got the role then. And even more interesting is that this begins a whole career for John Saxon of basically playing the same character. He comes back to play the cop in so many horror films, including Nightmare on Elm Street 1, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, New Nightmare, and From Dusk Till Dawn.
He's just got that cop face.
Resting cop face.
Resting cop face.
Speaking of Olivia Hussey, she was considered a bit odd by her castmates. Margot Kidder has made some comments about her over time. She was said to be very into her psychic and mysticism at the time. She took the role on the behest of her psychic, who told her she'd make a movie in Canada that would make a lot of money. And she was allegedly obsessed with marrying Paul McCartney.
Neither one of those things happened.
Yeah, I think she needs a new psychic.
She did have a lengthy film and television career, still active as of 2015. She's always managed to return to horror occasionally, starring in the 1990 made-for-TV It, directed by Halloween's own Tommy Lee Wallace, by the way. Psycho 4, as well as Ice Cream Man with Clint Howard. One of the most fascinating odd facts that at least I find about this movie is Billy the killer.
Oh, is that his name?
Yeah, which he mentions a few times on the phone, but it's intentionally kept vague. He was not cast. They did not put out a casting call for Billy. They did not cast anyone in the role of Billy. He was played by a number of people on the set, including Bob Clark himself, depending on the scene. So they made a really bold decision to actually never show him in full view during the movie. There's always some part of him that's obscured, so you never get the full body shot. That was done intentionally. Much of what we see is either a first-person shot from his perspective, like at the beginning when he's climbing up the house, or a solitary eye poking through a keyhole, a silhouette, a shadow, and his identity is really never truly revealed. You know, in the plot, they point the finger at her boyfriend throughout the whole thing, but then at the end certainly leads you to believe that that was not actually what happened. But there's a lot of ambiguity in that ending. During the preparation for the film's release in 1975, they did actually the studio asked Bob Clark to change the last scene to show Chris appear in front of Jess and say, "Agnes, don't tell them what we did," before killing her. However, Bob Clark insisted on keeping the original ambiguous ending. I don't know if that would have... What do you guys think about that? Do you think that would have made it...
I'm trying to think how that would have changed the end of the movie.
Well, she lived and he was dead, making it look like she killed him in self-defense, but we never found that out.
Right. And this might have been one of my long blinks during the slow-ass end, but who the fuck is Agnes?
Agnes was the name of the person the killer keeps mumbling on the phone. So
I couldn't understand shit when he was on her.
Yeah, he keeps talking about Agnes like, I don't know if it's like his mom or his sister or his girlfriend, but like whoever Agnes was apparently fucked that kid up.
Well, then yeah, if that, okay, then in that case, then yeah, it changes the ending because, I mean, then that would make it a definitive, oh, well, it was the boyfriend.
Yeah.
Well, it was a different boyfriend than the boyfriend we were led to believe, but I would find that ending slightly more unbelievable. Because
oh, right, Claire's boyfriend.
Right. The hockey player with the 1920s fur coat.
But how does that make Jess Agnes? Like it just makes things weirder. It doesn't.
There is no Agnes. It's all in his head. We don't even know if his name's Billy.
Yeah, because we don't know.
Existential crisis.
And they kept it ambiguous for a reason. I think that actually ended up working out to the benefit of the film. We did mention before that the original movie title was Stop Me, and Bob Clark had stated in an interview that he came up with the film's official title, Black Christmas, saying he enjoyed the irony of a dark event occurring during a festive holiday.
I do wish it had been a little more Christmassy, though. Like, other than like they had, like, the house was decorated for Christmas and they were having a Christmas party, but it was not, the theme of Christmas was not carried through the movie enough. We watched the remake a while ago, years ago probably at this point, and I feel like that one did a better job of reminding you this is a Christmas horror movie. Like, they kind of dropped the Christmas pretty quickly in this one.
Do you feel they lost the spirit of Christmas in this movie?
They did. They lost the reason for the season of Christmas horror movies.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you there. I do think the remake, from a visual perspective, probably took advantage of the holiday. I loved in the remake how they really emphasized like the old 70s like giant bulb Christmas lights, and the remake was definitely a fantastic homage to this movie and did some things better like in that respect. But Bob Clark was involved with the remake. It was all done and approved and sanctioned by the original people, so it wasn't like a studio just came and bought the property and just threw it out there. It was done with care by the original people involved. So like the remake, but from this is more appreciated than a lot of remakes, I think. But while you're saying that, I have to say, though, even though you're right, they don't, I don't think, utilize the Christmas theme as good as they could. I think from the one kill where they get Margot Kidder's character is amazing, and one of the best scenes in that whole era of films, where the Christmas carolers are out there singing, and he sneaks up and gets the glass unicorn, and he's like stabbing her, and they're cutting it in with the images of the carolers just, you know, and it gives that really disturbing mixture of the two extremes.
It definitely makes sense that there wasn't as much Christmas in it, other than really the Christmas party at the beginning and then that scene with the carolers. But it does make more sense that they didn't have, because they probably had to add that in once they made that decision, with it originally being called something else, and they had to work through multiple titles to get there. I guess it makes sense because they weren't planning on it being a holiday horror movie, and then eventually made the decision to add that. So it wasn't, they would have had to have started, or not started over, but go back and inject that everywhere. So I feel like the remake ended up being a lot of, like you said, because he was involved, a lot of, well, would have if I could have.
Right. Well, also in the remake, not in this one, they do take some time to try to give Billy a little bit of a backstory, which a lot of horror fans are always going to say, fuck that, you know, just in principle. I don't say fuck that in principle. I think if you do it right, it can be effective. But you are taking a gamble by doing it, because if you do it wrong, you are going to kill the mystique of your character.
But on the other hand, how many times during us watching that just now did I go, I am so confused by this killer. Like, what is happening? Why?
Yeah, no, I think you probably are onto something, that with the remake, there were probably a few things that were like, oh, well, maybe we could try it this way this time. And,
or like, there was something he had wanted to do, but as we experienced in our small amount of experience, sometimes you just can't do what you set out to do, and you just have to come up with an alternative.
No, because you have to have a finished product, so you just got to get it done and get the best thing you can and try to fix it in editing, you know?
Fix it in post.
But getting back to a couple of those points, having the Christmas holiday as a vehicle it's a convenient excuse for people to disappear. It's like, oh, well, she went to visit her sister. No, she's hanging on a meat hook.
Right. Or, oh, well, you know, old Sally, she gets sad around the holidays and just likes to hole up at home. I mean, there's all different kinds of ways that people just aren't around at the holidays.
And, you know, I think Sergeant Nash, you know, he knew this, so it's easy for girls to disappear and just go shack up in a cabin in the middle of the holidays.
And it's definitely totally normal for high school girls to not show up for 8 hours. That's fine.
Sure.
Well, there were sorority girls, but...
And, you know,
no, the high schooler.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
He's like, isn't it normal for her to be home a little late sometimes? And she's like, she's supposed to be home at noon. It's nighttime.
Well, they were the most incompetent police officers since Halloween 5.
Worst cops ever.
Ever.
You
know, regarding the killer, my thoughts are, I don't necessarily need a backstory in a killer like this. I think maybe Bob Clark trying to add to the scare factor is there is no rhyme or reason. This is very random. You know, just the girl in the park was very random.
Yes.
It's not he's targeting sorority girls.
Right.
He's targeting everybody. Just
Girls.
It's opportunity.
Girls and the cops protecting them.
So he saw an open window and he took an opportunity, and that's very random. And at this time, that's during the big crime wave in New York. There's a big crime wave happening over most of America. If, I'm reading Wikipedia properly. So these random acts of violence, this is becoming a thing, and I think that's adding to the fear factor.
Yes. And what I was saying with it going through multiple names is it actually, so it started as Stop Me, and then they went with Silent Night, Evil Night for a while.
Well, that Silent Night, Evil Night was the United States. They didn't call it Black Christmas in the U.S., so they were like, we'll call it Silent Night, Evil Night.
And, but then, because through syndication and home video, and then just people calling it what they're going to call it, it ended up becoming just widely known as Black Christmas. And also because the studio retracted the title after its initial release. So it is now officially and only known as Black Christmas. So, like I said, that probably had an effect on the overall theming of the movie not being quite fleshed out all the way. But, it is what it is. I think it works.
Can you imagine if it was called Silent Night, Evil Night in the U.S. and still was to this day? I mean, that sounds like a small thing, but what would we maybe not have gotten similarly had that hit under that title? I think Silent Night, Deadly Night would probably have been changed to something else title-wise.
Absolutely. I also feel like I probably would have been a little bit more, or not more, but I would have been a little bit disappointed in the movie if it had been called Silent Night, Evil Night, and then that was the movie that we got. I feel like Black Christmas is a little bit better of a title. That title, Silent Night, Evil Night, it portrays worse.
Yeah.
Something more sinister, something more supernatural, and not necessarily some marble mouth idiot in your attic, worried about Agnes, but,
The composer of the film's score, Carl Zitterer, stated in an interview that he created the film's music by tying forks, combs, and knives onto the strings of the piano to warp the sound of the keys, and noted that he would distort the sound further by recording it onto an audio tape and then slowing it down. So if you notice, there's really no score to speak of in this movie. It is just more random noises to kind of set mood and tone. And I think at points the lack of a score hinders it at times, but I think it also at times it helps.
Yes, it does make it feel very amateur at times because of the lack of score with that first-person shot sometimes, where it's supposed to look like natural movement of a person, but it also comes across as something that I shot while not really paying attention to my steadiness. But I do wonder if that is the piano that they tied forks, combs, and knives to. I wonder if that's the one that they destroyed in the movie because he destroyed it already. And maybe that's why that piano was...
I thought the same thing when we were watching it.
Is that the one they tied forks to?
I definitely feel there were points where there could have been a score that definitely would have helped with the pacing. If that's... Maybe we'll get to that later, but if I had any problems with the film, some of the pacing seemed a bit off and a bit slow.
Yes.
And
long blinks happened.
Yeah. And that's why you have a music score, is to help you build tension sometimes. So we were definitely missing that on this one.
Yeah, the lack of that, I do think it is. I think in parts it helps because you get that awkward, uneasy tension without having a score. Because a score reminds you that it is fake, that it's fiction. You're in the middle of a story, that you're being kind of purposefully manipulated along that journey with the music, and you do feel like, okay, I'm engulfed in a performance here. But without the score, there's that extra little bit of tension. Like I said, it just can make things a little more awkward and real. But also, to the converse of that, there's parts I think that it does drag because of it as well.
Oh, it definitely started dragging towards the end. I thought for sure it was over and we were headed out, and then it continued. I was like, oh, okay, we're done, okay. No, okay. Oh, no, okay, still going. Okay. And then it finally ended.
More odd facts. The audio for the disturbing and obscene phone calls were performed by a slew of different actors, actually. So again, just like with the physical casting of Billy, the audio was the same. Actor Nick Mancuso did a little bit. Director Bob Clark, again, stepping in and being the utility man, stepping in and doing the job wherever it's needed. Bob Clark was also the voice of Billy. Nick Mancuso did say in an interview that he stood on his head during the recording sessions to compress his thorax and make his voice sound more messed up. Once it got to network television, Black Christmas had its share of controversies with the networks. Not really to anyone's surprise, I don't think. Especially with some of the things that Billy is saying on the phone right out of the gate. I'm not sure how they were able to edit that for TV and make it still come off as making any sense, but it was called A Stranger in the House and was going to make its network television premiere. For some reason, the network also didn't want to call it Black Christmas. It was going to be January 28th, 1978 on NBC's weekly Saturday Night at the Movies. 2 weeks prior to its premiere, the Chi Omega sorority house on the campus of Florida State University was the scene of a double murder in which two Chi Omega sisters asleep in their beds were bludgeoned to death. The killer went to a nearby room in the sorority house and violently attacked two more sleeping co-eds who survived, and that killer was later identified as Ted Bundy, who was executed for this and other homicides on January 24th of 1984. So a few days before the movie was set to premiere on the network television, Florida's then Governor Ruben Askew contacted NBC President Robert Mulholland to request that the movie not be shown due to its all too similar theme as the murders of sorority sisters by an unknown madman at the Chi Omega house was almost exactly the plot of Black Christmas.
Interesting, is it? Life imitating art or art imitating life?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the movie had already been out, so...
I guess I was referencing more the fact what we were just talking about of, the rise in violent crime in the 1970s. And these types of killings, they've been around before, but, with larger broadcast news media going on, more people are hearing about these kinds of things.
Yes.
When it was released in the UK, the BBC had the word cunt removed, as well as several other crude and sexual references.
Which is kind of funny that, of all places, I mean, it's no Australia, but you would think that the Brits would be, A-okay with cunt.
It is funny, because we've definitely had these conversations. Like, you meet British people on vacation. We meet them a lot in Orlando, and they're awesome. They're some of my favorite people that we meet. I just love talking to them. We were laughing because I think she called somebody a cunt when we were over at a smoking section
Somebody
or
was
something.
being a cunt, and I called him a cunt. It happens.
This British lady we were talking to just is dying laughing, and she gets to the conversation about how that is such an offensive word here, but it's nothing to them. But, like, fanny is like a childish way for us to say butt here, and it's like the most vile curse word imaginable over there.
It literally means cunt. Like, fanny is like a worse than pussy and a worse than cunt, because, like, cunt is, like, nothing to them. They're like, oh, it's like calling somebody, like, a wee little shit. You're like, you wee little cunt. And they're like, you wee little shit. Like, they don't even care. It's not even a thing. But
to all our listeners in the UK and in America, we apologize doubly.
You knew what you signed up for. This is a horror show. Come on, let's not...
You gotta remember, this is going into the early 80s and the Thatcher administration. This is when they had the video nasties and the censorship, so...
So I guess it was before the pervasiveness.
I do wonder, when you make those edits, for TV and for Britain, I mean, what is the phone call? It's like, I'm going to hug and kiss you. It's like
what I want is I want to hug and kiss you.
Is the censor in the room, does he look a lot like the character Mr. Harrison? Was it actually Mr. Harrison? And he's like, I don't know about these. My sensibilities are flaring.
I'm gonna stick my tongue up your pink little pony.
Your pink little cat.
Ooh. A sad fact to end the auditorium, though. Bob Clark actually had a tragic death in 2007 before his time. He and his son, Ariel Hanrath Clark, at the age of 22, was with him in the car. They were both killed in a head-on car crash on the Pacific Coast Highway in Los Angeles on April 4th, 2007, when an SUV crossed the median and struck Clark's Infiniti, causing the closure of the highway for 8 hours. And police determined that the driver, Hector Velasquez Nava, had a blood alcohol level of 3 times the legal limit and was driving without a license. And he pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of vehicular manslaughter, but changed his plea to no contest. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison.
How do you... 3 times the legal limit. That's 2.4.
I mean, there's probably a large debate to be had about the legal system and how much people with DUIs get away with bullshit that they probably shouldn't, while other people who do far less heinous things get the book thrown at them. But
Yeah, 6 years for killing 2 people. Good job.
So please, people, designated drivers.
Yeah.
Ubers are not that expensive.
Absolutely. And when you're in your 20s, you just think you're invincible and you can get fucked up and do whatever. But, man, at almost 40, I can say I've survived some shit. And I'm a lucky man to still be here. So fucking get a designated driver. Alright, it's time for Numbers of the Beast. So, let's look at these numbers. Grizz Muji is out. I don't have my human calculator. The great Muji here. I don't know what I'm going to do. You're going to have to help me out.
Let's straighten up my specs here. Black Christmas, officially released on October 11th, 1974 in Canada. So a little bit early there for the Christmas holiday. I don't know if they do it differently up there. I don't know.
I think
Like Thanksgiving, it's like a month before.
I think it's at the same time.
And football counted in meters. So, released in Canada through Ambassador Film Distributors. Warner Brothers picked up the United States distribution, and released the film in tandem with the Christmas season on December 20th, 1974. A little late in the season for that one.
Yeah, really.
Right. Let's get prepped for the season.
Too early in Canada, too late in the States.
So, the film later screened in October 1975 in New York City and Chicago, and as well as 19 theaters in Los Angeles, where it generated considerable ticket sales. Warner Brothers then expanded the release to a total of 70 theaters nationwide in time for Halloween. Interesting. But the film only generated a daily average of $700 per theater per day, after which Warner Brothers withdrew the film from circulation that December.
Ouch.
Yeah, that's a bit of a bummer, but it was considered a success overall. I mean, look at the money it grossed, right?
Right, on a budget of $620,000, that's American. Black Christmas grossed over $4 million internationally. So, pretty good return, I would say.
Yeah, hey, it made a lot of money in those days, so everybody involved probably ended up pretty happy out of that, though Olivia Hussey's psychic, as far as it being the solution to all of her woes and making her rich beyond her wildest imagination, that didn't probably happen.
Now, in that psychic's defense, she and Olivia Hussey may have differing opinions of what a lot of money is.
I was also going to say, in defense of her psychic, she never said that she would make a lot of money all at once. She could have been referring to the fact that the movie continues to be available for purchase through DVD, Blu-ray, streaming, and online download. So, I mean, maybe she was referring to a lot of money in the sense of royalties over the rest of her life that would let her lead a comfortable life for most of it.
Well, I'm not really sure that's paying for her house in Swansea, if that's where she's living, but...
It might, because as we record this, you can watch the film on Showtime On Demand for about $15 a month. Not all of that goes to Olivia Hussey, of course. Shudder for around $5 a month for their subscription, and Screen Factory has also released a collector's edition Blu-ray that's currently available for between $20 and $30. So, if enough people listen to and share our podcast, maybe we can get enough people to buy their own copy of Black Christmas to get Olivia Hussey that money that she was promised by that psychic so many years ago.
And then we can keep her faith and mysticism alive.
Those crystals, she did not invest in those for nothing. Maybe she just forgot to recharge them in the river before she shot the film.
Perhaps.
That's a real thing. Google it, recharging crystals.
You know, it was Toronto in the winter, so I don't think the river was
It's probably frozen.
eligible for crystal recharging.
Yeah, I'm fascinated that this movie it does still have quite a bit of an impact. Being one of Margot Kidder's really first breakout performances, being the movie that is John Carpenter credits it for being one of the most influential films on Halloween, that and Psycho. And you can see it, even the ending, you can see where John Carpenter took kind of the ideas that they had for the ending of this and used them in Halloween, in my opinion, to maybe a little bit better effect.
Oh, absolutely. We've got the killer point of view from the very beginning. We're getting the opening shot with the killer's point of view. Like you said, the ambiguous ending. Where did he go? Oh, he's still here. He's not gone.
Yeah, that's of course all things that we came to know in Halloween, but you can see we're kind of originated here, at least in a very primitive form of that idea. And definitely encourage you to pick up your own copy. This is one that's really a must-have for all horror collectors. Also, check out the remake. It's very good. There's remakes get a lot of shit. Remakes get a lot of grief because there were certainly a lot of them in a short period of time, and most of them unnecessary. But I do feel like if you want to update a film for a modern audience, the remake for this could have been a lot worse. It was really a pretty strong film.
I also feel like if you wait 40 years between the original and your remake, I feel like you're safe. It's okay. It's not like they're remaking it every 5 years, all of Batman. Like, it's fine. Or Spider-Man, or...
Maybe you should run Hollywood.
Or The Grinch, apparently, since they're remaking that again.
But if you are not familiar, you haven't seen the film for some reason after 40-some-odd years, and we're going to sum it up for you, because it's time for the burial plot. It is now time to uncover the burial plot. 'Twas the night before Christmas in the sorority house. Instead of going home for the holidays, these girls are getting soused.
Oh my god!
The party is hopping and Peter's grabbing Claire's fanny. A foul-mouthed Bob has had a few too many.
Close the goddamn door!
But Jess looks concerned. She's pacing the hall, which is just about when she gets an obscene phone call. Lick it. Lick it. Lick it. Bob takes the phone and goes right below the belt. She tells the creep to kindly go fuck himself.
Why don't you go stick your tongue in a wall socket? That ought to give you a charge.
I'm gonna stick my tongue up your pretty pink pony.
Claire's pissed at Bob for riling up the perv, and it turns out her anger is justified because he's hiding in her closet, and when she goes to bed he's going to suffocate her with a plastic bag. Merry Christmas. Mrs. McHenry is next up to die. Her trip to her sister's was never realized. Instead, she took a hook to the face, but at least it meant no more of that god-awful fruitcake. The Yuletide cheer is in the air, and a choir sings carols while Bob gets stabbed to death upstairs. The police find the body of missing young Janice, and right about now is when everyone panics. Jess gets another ring from the obscene caller, but somehow he knows about her drama with the baby's father.
It's just like having a wart removed. Billy, Agnes, don't kill the baby.
Little do they know, Phyllis is next to die. While checking on Bob, she gets jumped from behind. But just now the police have figured it out. The calls are coming from inside the house. It's all down to Jess, and she's done talking, but our killer Billy isn't done with the stalking. A locked cellar door is all that keeps her safe when Peter smashes the glass window pane. He comes to her rescue, but she doesn't realize it, and beats him to death with a poker on accident. The police find the mess, too little too late, and as the killer escapes, we'll never learn Jess's fate. The end. And that was the burial plot for Black Christmas. Alright, well, it's been a great episode talking about this highly influential film as we start to wrap things up. I guess I have to say that its importance can't be overstated for what it did and what it set up. Not only slasher films, but holiday horror, which are some of my favorite as far as the new subgenres of horror go. I always look for great horror films around the holiday season. There is a certain darkness to the holidays that I think is kind of glossed over, that I enjoy. I think the stresses of it and the pressure sometimes allow us to enjoy that cynical side of it a bit. You like to see the Santa Claus maybe taking an axe to somebody, you know? But yeah, I love this movie. I love Olivia Hussey's performance. I love Margot Kidder's performance, and it's one I go back to every year.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. This is the first time I've seen the original Black Christmas. Like I said, we had watched the remake a few years back, and I really, really enjoyed that. You should definitely check it out if you haven't. It's a few years old now, so it should be out there for very cheap. It did get a little slow towards the end, but, I mean, it didn't really take away from the overall movie. It definitely felt longer than it was, but that's okay. Definitely see a lot of where other movies take their cues from after this, from that point forward. It was definitely a good one to see where that niche mini genre comes from.
I enjoyed the movie as well. It's not the greatest thing you'll see, but I think it's definitely good. This would be a good, watch with your significant other, maybe on Thanksgiving night after you realize why you don't see your family except maybe once or twice a year at the holidays. So, sorry everyone. But no, this is a good Saturday night kind of film. Not a slasher film like we know and love today, but, kind of an important little milestone in history. Really good performance by Margot Kidder, as previously stated. I'm not entirely sure she was sober in those scenes.
She wasn't. That is a spoiler alert.
Method acting.
And also the housekeeper, almost a vaudevillian physical comedy from that lady. Great stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We can't forget about talking about the housekeeper. Like the side story of her and her alcoholism.
All her hidden booze.
And it's played for straight, like, Otis the Town Drunk laughs.
Though I definitely, at certain points, didn't know if it was just ridiculous acting or if she was supposed to also be a sketchball that we're supposed to be thinking and she's a possible suspect. I'm like, is she sketchy or drunk? Who knows?
And also very understated performance by the man playing Mr. Harrison. I'm going to have to look him up, see if there's any other great Canadian classics with him in it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he really was. Because the whole film is mostly young 20-some-odd girls, he, as a 60, 70-year-old man in the midst of all of that, definitely stands out. And it was great that we talked about this film really as a segue into our next full season, which will be starting first week of January of 2019. Seeking Human Victims is taking on the slashers. That's right. And we have a 10-episode season for you. So Black Christmas being considered one of the first slasher films, a nice little segue in this bonus episode. So enjoy the holiday season coming up. Enjoy the next 2 weeks because we're coming back at you. Grizz just mentioned the awkward family dinners that the holidays are comprised of. Well, we're taking a movie that skewers the family dynamic for the holidays. That'll be Krampus coming up in 2 weeks right here on the 4th bonus episode for Seeking Human Victims, and we'll be back with season 1 first week of January. Have a good night.
This is not a test. This is not a test. Please remain calm.
buried dead are coming back to life and seeking human victims.
Seeking human victims. Seeking human victims.
Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house a creature is staring, and he is in a mouth. He's a man in the attic with a telephone. He's gonna kill you, you think you're alone. It's gonna be a black Christmas this year. It's gonna be a black Christmas this year. You got something to fear on your black Christmas this year. Lives in the attic, he lives in the wall. He's watching you as you're walking down the hall. He's waiting to kill you, he's waiting to strike. You better think twice before you say goodnight. It's gonna be a black Christmas this year. It's gonna be a black Christmas this year. You got something to fear on your black Christmas this year. Who could the killer be? Is it Chris or is it Pete? Is it you or is it me? He says his name is Billy. It's gonna be a black